Hello and welcome to Free Inside. My name is Luigi Saracino.
I'm Ken Ventura.
And we're here with our fellow podcaster Simcoe Alcati, who is ably manning the board. And this is our very first show. Hooray!
Yay! This is a podcast called Free Inside, which will be a weekly show about everything pop culture.
That's right. So we'll be talking about everything from movies to theater to video games to comic books. We're going to cover it all.
And today we have a very special guest for our first episode. We hope you enjoy it.
Tom Green has built a successful career in the entertainment industry for more than 3 decades. It may not have been as visible recently as during the heyday of the manic, crazy genius that was the Tom Green Show, but that doesn't mean he hasn't been busy. Tom has been down in the trenches. For the last 15 years, he's been working his heart out, sharpening an already sharp wit by doing stand-up, by coming back to his original love, by playing club after club, tour after tour. I've had the good fortune of knowing Tom for almost 30 years, and I first met him in the basement of what was then the Beacon Arms Hotel in Ottawa, which served as the testing ground at that point for any new comic in town, namely the Yuck Yucks Comedy Club. Tom at that point was 15 years old. He'd come up with his friend, who turned out to be his cohort on the Tom Green Show later on, Phil Giroux, to do a spot in the New Talent Showcase. Now, I'd been working as a stand-up for a few years at that point, but Tom's enthusiasm, his wit, his honesty, and frankly his fearlessness were impressive to see in a newcomer. Tom immediately stood out. And whether as a rapper, as a stand-up, as a musician, Tom has done it all. In fact, he's even a beer mogul. Now think about that for a second. The kind of pull required to not only have a beer named after you, but have it brewed specifically for you. Let me tell you folks, that is Corleone family level pull. The word fearless gets thrown around quite a bit these days, and let's face it, we live in an era where fearless is used to sell everything from greeting cards to shoes to cars. But when you're applying that same word to Tom Green, it turns out it's 100% accurate. To me, certainly Tom has always been fearless. And it seems to me that Tom was more interested in pushing the boundaries of comedy, of not just figuring out what was funny, but why it was funny. And to realize that even in discomfort, even in quiet, there's a comedy in there. And that takes a pretty insightful guy to figure out. But more than anything else, what really sells Tom and what really sells his material is his complete and utter commitment to a bit. His love of language is apparent, and obviously language is something that most comics love and work within, and Tom has always been very comfortable in that space. Tom has always been the guy that made you sit up and take notice. Myself and my podcast buddies Ken Ventura and Simcoe Alcati recently had the chance to have a seat in Simcoe's kitchen and have a good long chat with Tom, actually. There were Deli Meats, there were tiny cream-filled cakes. It was a lovely afternoon. We'd also like to take a moment to thank Yuck Yucks Comedy Club and Howard Wagman, who treated us very well when we came down to hang out with Tom, as well as the kind folks at Bose, who were extremely generous, and we kind of tagged along on a pub crawl, which was an absolute ride, so we want to thank them as well. Hope you enjoy the show.
I'm being creative. Now, if you'll excuse me, I still have some work to do.
This is cool. This is your first podcast.
Daddy, would you like some sausage? Daddy, would you like some sausages? Daddy, would you like some sausage?
Hello, my name is Tom Green.
Check the OR, you like it so far. Check the OR, you like it so far. Check the OR, you like it so far. Check the OR, you love the OR.
And you are listening to Free Inside in Ottawa. Live from Ottawa. In Ottawa. Ottawa.
Hi, Tom.
Hello. Hi. Luigi. Hi.
Hi. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. This is cool. We've got microphones.
Got a lot of microphones.
You've got some sandwich meats, some deli meats. Yeah, so this is going to be good.
No, I'm prepared. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I had the chance to see you on Friday.
Yeah.
And from all accounts, a very solid weekend. And so it's, I mean, being back home after a little while, is it a bit of an adjustment in terms of doing comedy here versus LA? Like, what's really the distinction?
Oh, yeah, I know. I love doing comedy in Ottawa. I love it. It's, I guess because I'm trying to do a lot more crowd work and improv these days with the crowd, and so when you have like a really strong understanding of the city that you're in, it's more fun. It can go more directions with that. So and it's just nice being home too.
I bet.
Yeah.
So you find that there's a different approach or a different attack in terms of New York versus Toronto or versus Ottawa?
All I would say is, I mean, I would say that basically in Ottawa that it's fun because you can play off the fact that, you know, I'm from here, and so that's sort of an extra element that you can have fun with. But I think the thing I'm most surprised about the more I travel is that it really doesn't vary that much.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, I just got back from doing my first show in Israel. I did in Israel. You know, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a lot different, the way they react.
And in terms of beats and timing and all that
Yeah,
stuff.
and just the rhythm of it. And, you know, and the material, though, too. Like, you know, this is how, in a way, it's disappointing. In a way, it's a relief. It's probably more disappointing than it is a relief. I'd rather go over there and have them not understand a word I'm saying and have to figure out than to feel like, oh, the whole world is exactly the same. You know, it makes us all feel very, you know, yeah, it just makes it seem like the world is so much less surprising when you. I remember the first time I went to Australia to do stand-up, and you know, I flew all the way over to Australia. I'd never been to Australia before, and I get there and I'm thinking, and then I go to the Starbucks, you know, and I'm drinking my triple grande vanilla latte, you know, out of the same cup. You know, it's just you know. I remember when I did a USO tour, and I went to Bahrain, and landed in Bahrain. Been on a flight for 24 hours or something, and we decided to take a walk from the Marriott that we were staying at, and we walked down the street. We ended up eating Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Sorry, you were at the Marriott in Bahrain.
In Bahrain,
Okay.
yeah. And then we went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken for our first meal in Bahrain. So I mean, you know, when just everything is the same everywhere, people just laugh at the same shit too, you know.
That's really interesting because I mean, I guess the supposition would be that it is different, in fact, right? That you'd have to change the timing or you'd have to change the material. And sometimes you often hear comics say, like, I'll be a little bluer in this club versus this club, right? So
there is a bit of that.
shift?
There's definitely subtle elements of that for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I mean, I can tell the same joke with, you know, an F-bomb in it or without it, you know. I mean, and sometimes I clean up the set, and that does. Like I found in England, they don't like unnecessary profanity. Yeah, but it's subtle. Like they don't like, you know, stand up and walk out if you swear. But I just feel that they're more. I was surprised on this last tour. I find they're more reserved in England than they are in Ireland or than they are in Wales.
I guess the reason I find that a little ironic is if you look at the comedians and the troops particularly who came out of England, who are known for you know, oddness and that kind of thing, that they would be so.
They're probably rebelling against this sort of uptight conservative nature. Probably why there's a lot of comedians from Ottawa too. You know, it's sort of this conservative nature is in society, so you want to like lash out against it a bit. There's sort of a. Now, I'm not saying people don't laugh at the show in England. It's just kind of like a little bit more if you get really. I think they like more of a cleaner show. Now, that being said, I've had a show in London once where it was the most off-the-hook, rowdy, rambunctious crowd ever. So I don't know. Maybe there's no rules to it. So.
Well, it's interesting. Can you speak to the idea of, because I mean, a lot of comics have come out of this city, right? I mean, Norm Macdonald, Mike Macdonald, Jeremy Hotz, yourself, like guys who've gone on to become larger than life and iconic in a lot of ways. And it's interesting that, you know, as you said, coming out of such a conservative town where, you know, the cliches at 6 o'clock, the sidewalks get rolled up and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
So is it that rebelling that we're seeing? Because it's, you know, I don't know what else it would be in terms of, I think it's the rebelling something else, because you've got guys whose styles are so different as well.
I also sometimes think that growing up in Ottawa, we have, it's a little bit less intimidating of a place, Ottawa. A lot less intimidating of a place than bigger cities. And so it's non-threatening. And then if you're, you know, want to be a comedian or you want to be an artist or you want to be a musician, maybe you feel like you have more freedom to experiment and you know, maybe there's not as much pressure to succeed or not as much pressure about failing because you're kind of surrounded by people that are not in this
hyper
rat race of show business. It's
Yeah.
kind of like every if you're doing. I remember back in the day when we were doing stand up, and I was 16 years old, and we were back at the club. I mean, there was 12 of us
Yeah.
doing stand up,
Yeah.
and it was sort of such an obscure thing to be doing that we all sort of were supportive of one another. I know you were very supportive of me as a kid. I always told you this the other night. I'm very grateful for that, because when you're a kid and you're getting into stand up and you go down to a comedy club, probably it'd be a lot more difficult to do in New York City than it was to do in Ottawa, where you had basically 10 guys doing stand up. They were the same 10 guys every week, and everybody was super nice to each other, and there wasn't this sort of cutthroat competition for stage time or things like that,
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very kind, and I'm certainly humbled by that. But you're right. I think what I find interesting is you don't see that same camaraderie. We used to get together on the weekend and we'd help each other. How about a tag for this or a tag for that? And it feels like it's become a little more self-centered in some ways. And it makes me wonder how you can be a good comic if you're that. I mean, being introspective is one thing, but being self-centered is not necessarily a helpful tool.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know, because I guess it's just I haven't really I wasn't even really aware that there was so many local stand-ups in Ottawa until you told me the other day. That it's a real sort of gotten a little bit more cutthroat here.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, but I do think that's still it's probably even amplified in a place like in bigger cities than it is here. So there is something about Ottawa that I think is probably people say, oh, is it in the maple syrup or is it, but I think it's actually just something to do with the nature of the city. Makes people, I think, feel comfortable to be creative. I mean, I think about like the early years of my TV show when we started at Rogers Cable, and I'd go down to the market and I'd take meat to my head, or I'd go out and pull pranks on people. And I remember when we took the show to New York, and the first time we went out to do a prank on somebody, a guy was chasing me with a hammer. I went out to Long Island. To deliver a pizza to somebody or something like this, and the guy starts chasing me with a hammer, and I'm going, wow, this is just a lot different than doing the pranks in Ottawa. But I think maybe if you grew up in that environment where people were a little more aggressive, maybe I wouldn't have had the desire to go out and tease everybody with a video camera, because here it was just sort of I sometimes think that maybe I need to. I'm starting to spend more time in Ottawa, but I want to maybe start spending more time in Ottawa for that reason, actually, as well. Not just to come back and visit family, but to also come back and maybe go do some filming in the old locations in the Byward Market, where I just go out and kind of feel that energy again. There's something like when you go up to someone on the street in Canada and kind of start talking to them. There's a sort of a sweetness to the people, like when they get mad in kind of a
sweet way,
a calm, nice, befuddled way. They don't just sort of start screaming at you, or want to fight you, or pull out a knife or something like that. That's never happened. Well, that did happen to me in New York. Someone pulled out a knife, but they pulled out the knife in New York, but they weren't really trying to kill me. I don't think they were trying to cut me out of this plastic bubble that I was in.
Like they were trying to help you?
I was in a large plastic bubble, like a large 10-foot tall plastic bubble that you run within, like a hamster in a hamster wheel. And I was running in Central Park. I was running out onto the softball field and interrupting these softball games. You can see this on YouTube. And then basically these New Yorkers were getting angry. Hey, well, you get off the fucking field, hey! And they'd come at me, and I would, keep coming back, and then they would shove me in this ball. I was rolling, and the guy just pulled out his knife and was trying to cut me out of this expensive rental rubber ball that we'd gotten.
I love that it was a rental.
Yeah,
I don't even know who I would call.
That MTV rented from Rubber Balls Are Us, I guess. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was a fun bit. But yeah, again, first couple of weeks of shooting in New York, aggression. Guy came out with me hammer. Guy came out with me with a knife. And so it kind of takes a little bit of the fun out of it.
You think?
Yeah.
Understatement of the year. It takes the hammer thing is really bringing me down. I got to be honest. I think that's interesting, and I think I agree with you. There is a room given here, but I will say to your credit as well, and we talked about this a little bit on Friday. You were by far the most fearless stand-up I'd seen, for sure. And even at 15 or 16, there was stuff that you were doing, and I kind of confided in you a little bit in terms of, with me it was more about the attention, the validation, at least at the beginning. With Tom, it was like, this is funny, and I'm going to do this until you realize it's funny.
Yeah.
And that was, not to embarrass you, but that was a bravery that you don't generally see, because most comics, I would hazard to say, are like me, are about the reciprocation, the attention, the validation. Mm-hmm. And you were just so, even at 15 or 16, so confident in what you were doing. And I know it might not have seemed that way to you, but as somebody who was an outsider and getting a sense of what you were doing and how big it was what you were doing, right? Like it was, I think you should be...
See, I remember when I was a kid being terrified, right? Terrified when I would do stand-up. Now I still get nerves, but I was and I have been terrified many times since doing, not necessarily stand-up, but going on things and performing, and I get kind of anxiety, right? And but I remember when I was doing stand-up 30 years ago, right? Or 28 years ago probably was when I was doing it. It seems like a long time, like I was, I didn't relate to anybody in the audience. I was younger than everyone in the audience, so I was intimidated just from that level, just from being younger than everybody else, right? Being in a bar, hadn't really been to a lot of bars before. Yuck Yucks was probably the first bar I'd ever gone to, I mean, we would go to Hull and stuff, but yeah, actually around that time is when I started discovering, we could go to Hull. They'll let us in Hull, Me and Phil would go to Club Zinc.
Oh my God, dude.
Phil had turned 18 and I was still, 16 and a half. So he had his ID that said he was 18. We were both, tall, 6'2" or whatever we were. And so, we would walk into Club Zinc down those stairs, and then we would walk up to the bouncer, and Phil would pull out, they'd ask guys for his ID, and Phil would pull out his ID, and I'd walk around the bouncer. And Phil would always do some great distraction, He'd be like, I have a question about this thing here, and I would just walk around the bouncer.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so for like a year and a half, we went to Zinc like that until I turned 18.
It's hilarious.
Club Zinc was cool, too. Club Zinc in Hull was cool. They played all the good, alternative music and hip-hop.
Well, even that, like the music scene, I'm glad you mentioned that, because you have had in my opinion, a very interesting career. And like we talked about a little bit on Friday, like you went from stand-up to the show, right, to music, to acting, to stand-up, to music. Like you don't see that transition, right? Like, like in other words, if Brad Pitt records a record, I don't really care. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But you've been able to do all of those things.
I would dig that, actually.
I wonder.
It would be a good album.
Would it be covers, I wonder?
I would dig that.
No, he'd write his own stuff. He's got a wealth of stuff to talk
Yeah,
about.
that's true.
Yeah.
They'd all be called Angelina. This is the first song. It's called Angelina. But you don't see that. You don't see transitions from musicians who are like, I'm going to go do stand-up tomorrow.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to do all of those as well as you do, like, can you maybe speak to the idea of what the commonality is, or how you've been able to make that transition?
Well, I guess, it all stems back to when I was a teenager. Stand-up and the rapping was kind of an offshoot of stand-up, really. I mean, meaning I like getting up on stage and, being a goof, So when I was at Colonel By, where we've both, graced the stages of the Colonel By Auditorium at some wild Dreams Go Color concerts and things back in the day, and I used to MC some of those concerts. I was I think I used to. That was when I first remember really liking being on stage, was when I would go host the Christmas talent shows at Colonel By Secondary School in Gloucester, in Beacon Hill, Gloucester, and Ogilvy Road in Gloucester. But yeah, so I'd run for students' council so I could run the assembly, so I could get up on stage and be a goof. And then I realized that rapping was a good way to get on stage because it was a music showcase, and I didn't know anything about music, but I knew that I was listening to, starting to listen to the Beastie Boys and Run DMC, and I got kind of really curious in how the music was recorded, but basically I wanted to figure out how to make beats so that we could write raps and get up on stage and I could be a goof, right? And so that was the same with stand-up. It's like, I can go down there without the beats and be a goof, or I can go on college radio and goof around and say silly things and try to confuse people and draw attention to myself,
Well, you know what?
So,
if I may say, I think what's interesting is that, I know you're saying, it's about being a goof and all that kind of stuff, but it seems a little dismissive to me in terms of, read what you're going to read.
Oh, yeah.
I thought this was amazing.
I got a quote from a buddy on Facebook, Van Walker, and he said this about you. I don't understand most of the way he writes, but I'll read it as is.
Quiet as kept, but Tom Green got bars. Your boy can spit rhymes off the dome, and he's already better than every mumble rapper in captivity. I saw him drop some heat on a YouTube video and just about lost my mind.
he used every hip-hop buzzword in that one paragraph. Huh?
Exactly. And I don't understand it, but
that was lit. That paragraph was lit.
It was lit.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
But things still fat? I don't know if that's a thing. Probably not. But
This leads me to a question about, are you going to get back into doing some more music, and is it even worth it these days with the music industry the way it is?
Yeah. I actually am doing music. I played Luigi some tunes the other night on my iPhone speaker because we couldn't figure out the Bluetooth on the sound system. But,
I think the whiskey had something.
yeah, the whiskey might have muddled our comprehensive skills. But no, it was cool. I mean, I like making music, so I do like making music. In the process of figuring out all that technology stuff, so I could get up on stage and be a goof, I ended up really enjoying technology. And that's sort of the same thing with the TV show. It was started from video technology, when we were at Algonquin College together, right? And I dropped out, and then I went back 2 years later. Yeah. I liked the gadgets. So I have a studio in Los Angeles that I have set up that's like an office space that's not in my house, but I go there in the daytime and I record and write songs and I think from a strictly business of music perspective, if that's the question, I think that I think the new way of looking at show business in a lot of ways for me is it's a perfect time to be a completely independent artist, right? Or a comedian, musician, illustrator, whatever it is that you do, podcaster, right? You do something, you're completely independent of any mainstream, corporate company, the networks, the studios, right? You don't need all that anymore, but you do have to I think you do have to try to do a lot of different things, because it's, I like to make music, so I want to make music and I'm going to put it out there independently and somebody will find that music, Maybe not millions of people, but maybe hundreds of thousands of people will discover the music, and maybe just thousands. It doesn't matter how many. Somebody will like it, right? And then that'll translate into them maybe coming to my comedy show, right? So they all kind of pollinate one another, So, I think I'm going to put out a little independent record this year. It's going to be fun. I'm going to print some vinyl and bring it around to my comedy shows and sell some vinyl records at the merch table, so maybe I'll sell a few hundred of them or something, but it'll be cool maybe, and then you can make some funny videos for that and put them on, some goofy music videos. And I think as long as you're enjoying the creative process of everything and having fun doing it, then that kind of comes across and translates into something bigger later, without necessarily having to go make a lot of money off music,
And your music, I was watching the NHL playoffs this year, Hockey Night in Canada, and there you were.
Absolutely, yeah.
How was
Check
that?
the OR. You like it so far?
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
How was that?
That was super cool. That was one of the coolest things ever, being on Hockey Night in Canada. Yeah, they asked me to shoot a little thing for the Senators because what a year we had, right? The Senators. You're wearing the Senators hat right
I
now.
am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a
Great
year. It was great until it wasn't.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and you get all excited, right? Watching, and
then
it's
it's
just
done.
the best thing ever, and then it's just instantly over.
Yeah.
And it's.
But you just explained the last 3 relationships I've had.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But, yeah, it's interesting because the music you played me, and thank you for doing that. What I really was taken by was that you had some full-on punk songs, you had some hip-hop stuff, you had some house stuff, and I think, to speak to your point about it being a good time to be an independent artist, just the idea that you have that liberty now, right? Like, I remember being in band years ago and releasing a record, and one of the things we got busted for was, you got one song that's like a ballad, and then you got one song that's like a country song. And yet now, it seems like that's not an issue at all, unless you're with a label where you've got to be that genre specific.
Yeah.
So that must give you a lot of freedom in terms of what you want to write.
I think I have the freedom to goof around too, because it's not really my, full-time gig. I'm just kind of doing it for fun. And I have questioned though, like, I think I might want to. I did start doing these punk rock songs. I just did like three of them last month, and I hadn't done that before. Like a couple of them, I actually did the guitar myself. Like I lay it all into Pro Tools, right? So you don't really have to be. And sometimes I'll bring a guitarist in too. But I basically just record loops, and then I put it together the way I would put together a hip hop track, but it's a punk rock track. So like I'll record loops of a guitar line, and then I'll go in and I'll sample those loops, and then I'll re-loop it in Pro Tools, and I'll sample a punk rock beat, and put it in and put in changes. But I'm not having a drummer coming in and playing, so it's kind of fun. That's fun putting it together like that. So, but
do you mind talking to you let me? We talked about this on Friday. How you used to do it back in the day. So when you first started recording with the ghetto and all of that.
Yeah, we had like with the technology, with the studio setup.
Yeah, like how you used to do it in terms of recording the first OR record.
I had a samplers, a Kai S900 and an S950 sampler, which were rack mount samplers, and basically, the start of it all was I go to CHUO, the Ottawa University radio station, and I would basically record all of the jazz and funk loops off of all the records there that I liked, just going through every Isaac Hayes record and the Meters and Tower of Power and everything, the Average White Band, all these great funk bands, which suddenly I'm starting to find an interest in, like, 70s disco music and funk music, because I'm enjoying
because it's great.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying taking the loop off the first bar of the first few bars of the record and going home and loading it into my sampler. I had it hooked up to a Atari computer. So I figured this all out at Steve's Music, right? You go to Steve's Music, you talk to the guys there, and I figured it all out basically through that. So, which is kind of I think a thing I miss about the pre-internet world.
The kind of guerrilla-ness of it, like the guerrilla.
Yeah, like I the way I figured out how to make music, there was no internet sites where you can go Google and read about electronic music. So I'd have to, get on the bus, go downtown to Rideau Street, go to Steve's Music, sit around, play with a drum machine for an hour until somebody came up and said, "Are you going to buy that?" And, "No, but how's it work?" I'm thinking about buying it. How's it work, right? And then you go buy a used one, that's not as good as that one, but it's sort of, and you put together this little studio in your parents' basement, right? With a Tascam 4-track and it was a pretty elaborate setup. Like, if you want to get into like the real specifics of it, which is kind of funny, I had a little SMPTE timecode generator.
That's not crazy.
So I would plug that into my Atari MIDI interface, it would generate a tone and send that tone to the 4-track and record the tone on track 4 of the 3 audio tracks on the cassette tape, right? And so now when you'd hit play on you'd hit record on the 4-track, you'd hit play on the Atari sequencer, and you would play the whole song, and it would generate that time code. It sounded like record that sound under the track for the 3 minutes the song was or whatever. And now when you hit rewind on the 4-track and you hit play on the 4-track or record on the 4-track, it starts the sequencer, right? It starts the sequencer. So now you have 3 tracks on the 4-track just for vocals, because all your audio is remaining digital coming out of the. So then you run it all through your mixer, so then you can record your vocals onto the 4-track. It's synced up with the sequencer and with the samplers and the drum machines that are all synced together with these MIDI cables. And then you basically can, record your vocals, and then you play it back through a mixer, and then it goes into a little digital audio tape recorder and a cassette recorder, and you just master it through that. So all your music's sort of digital, and your vocals are the only thing that are coming off of the crappy little 4-track cassette, which doesn't sound that great, but it sounds pretty good though.
I find it interesting because as you mentioned yourself, like now if you want to record stuff, it's pretty much all laid out for you, right? Like it's easier than it's ever been to play music.
Yeah.
But you were doing it at a time where, I know it was fun. I can tell it was fun for you to figure out just from how you were talking about it. But that's an amazing amount of work.
Yeah.
To continue to, like, I can't imagine if most people would be like, once they found out how hard it is, I think most people would be like, okay, screw this.
Yeah.
But the fact that you were so wrapped up into, like, that's you all over, dude, right? Is I mentioned the fearlessness thing. You don't know how you do it, you just do it.
Yeah.
And you work it out.
Yeah, that's the hard part about making music is just, things don't work, when you don't, but it's gotten a lot easier,
Yeah.
And then once you get a really good system, I have a really good system set up now in my studio. I run Pro Tools. I have a lot of loops and samples I work with, and I have a MPC drum machine and chord keyboard, and a nice microphone, a nice LA2A compressor I use, which I run everything through this compressor, and it gives it a nice sort of vintage sound. So it's interesting to me.
So what do you
Having said that, though, please, when you release an album, do one song the old way.
Yeah.
Try and record one song the old way if you can still do it.
Yeah, I'd have to get all that equipment again, and it would be actually basically be impossible. I mean, I could do it, but it would require, it would require assembling a whole setup with multiple components, and it would then also sound like shit too. So it would really be a strange thing to go through all that effort to make something that sounded that shitty, But
what are you looking at for the release?
It would just be fun to hear.
Yeah.
What are you looking at for the release?
I'm not sure really what I'm going to do.
Okay.
I'm just probably going to just put something out next year. My main thing is just doing the stand-up is my main thing, And this is something that's, like I was saying earlier, it's going to be a fun little side thing that I do and put out on the internet. And if 10 people listen to it, that'll be great. If more, that's even better. And I'm basically just on the road. 2018, I'm already booking the tours, and I'm just going to keep going every weekend. I go from here to Buffalo, and then to Toronto on the 30th, and then to St. Louis, and then on and on and on. So
where are you playing to St. Louis?
Helium Comedy Club.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we talked about this.
Yeah, and Buffalo is at Helium also. So.
Oh okay.
Yeah. So.
I guess what I want to ask you about as well was I told you Tom Shoebridge said hi. We talked.
Yeah, Tom. How are you, Tom? You're listening, Tom? Let's get together for a beer there, eh, bud? Let's get her done.
What I and maybe I'm reading into it, but it seems to me that you have an affection for words, for how words sound, for the, like the almost the built-in nonsense, how a word can be said over and over and over again, and it almost takes the meaning out of it, right? Like what I liked watching was how you pick, because we've talked about this as well, when you're a comedian, where you put if even matters. And so it seems like you're very precise about the language that you use.
Yeah. I like to really. I ultimately end up typing up all my jokes on a. I don't always do it right away.
So you put in the beats as well, like the really.
Yeah. So I'll start out with they'll be like the idea, right? Like, oh, that's a funny idea, just whatever is, ridiculous or ironic or whatever that's the idea, right? And then I usually type it up in my phone first, just the loose idea. Then usually I kind of figure out what the beats are in my phone before I say it on stage. Not always though. Sometimes I'll just say the idea on stage and hopefully I'll come up with something there. But usually it's
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
As a non-comedian, explain a beat in comedy.
All right.
Well, you've got your setup, and you've got punchline, and you've got rhythm to it. So you have to. It's just the rhythm of the words, right?
You call it a beat.
Yeah. Where you decide to pause, where you decide not to pause. Like it's.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, it's generally. I mean, for me, it was never. I was a much lazier comic, I think, because I never really wrote stuff. I'd always write the idea down and then just hope that something would happen on stage, which is terrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Yeah.
But that's one of the things that attracted me, and I think you to comedy, is that notion that it's all on you, right? Like, we both played music. When you're playing in a band, if I screw up, I got 3 people behind me to cover my ass.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're not going to necessarily notice the one bad note. But if you screw up on stage doing stand-up, like, it's just you.
Yeah.
Which is one of the greatest things, but is also one of the worst things about it seems.
Yeah, I mean, now it's once I think the hardest part about writing new stuff is knowing that you have an hour of material that's working great. Why would you go up and try something that's untested, So, that's the, I've got like, I don't know, a couple hours of material right now if I wanted to just do material, but a lot of it I rotate it out. I keep rotating new stuff out and old stuff out and rotating new things in. So I find I'm in this place now where I keep I never really can identify when the new set begins and the old one ends, So, I mean, sometimes the easiest thing to do is just throw it all away and go up and try, a set from scratch with all new material. And I've been like writing. I'll write it out first, and then I'll have just sort of notes on stage when I'm doing new material. Then just a page on stage with just the subject of the joke, and hopefully I'll remember the joke.
Yeah.
And usually the first time I don't remember the joke. The first time I try a new joke, I don't remember the joke. So I say it anyways. And it doesn't get a laugh because I basically just say a bunch of words that aren't connected together properly. And I'm trying to, I do craft these, like, a goofy joke that I did just recently that I like a lot, which is, like, I like the wording of it, right? It's really just about the absurdity of the wording of it. It's a stupid joke, I go, what do people call themselves who work in the packing department at fudge factories? If it were me, I'd call myself a chocolatier, which is ironic because calling yourself a chocolatier makes you sound like a fudge packer. I like that.
Such a great bit, dude. Oh, I love that.
I mean, it's such a silly joke, but I worked on the wording for a long time on that because it started, So now the reason I say, what do people call themselves who work in the packing department at fudge factories? I wanted fudge factories to be the last word, right? So to get to fudge factories being the last word in that sentence, there's a lot of sort of odd grammatical sort of compromises you're making. Like, what do people call themselves who work in the packing department at fudge factories? It started out when I went up and said it naturally the first time. It's like, if you work at a fudge factory in the packing department, what do you call yourself?
And you found it was less impactful than putting it at the end, obviously.
Yeah, because as soon as you say fudge factory, everybody knows something's coming
up. That's really interesting.
And it's also just the funnier two words, fudge factory, just the alliteration of it, fudge factory. So, what do people call themselves who work in the and if you work in the packing department at a fudge factory, what do you call yourself? You're already figuring out the joke before the sentence ends, and you're sort of half laughing.
But then the joke doesn't go where you think it would go.
Yeah.
Which is what's interesting to me about that.
That was the twist. So the twist of that is what I thought of first.
Yeah.
And then it was, how do you get to that twist? So the twist being, the irony of not calling yourself a fudge, but calling yourself a chocolatier.
And chocolatier is a great word.
Chocolatier, another silly word, right? I think it was when I thought of that word that's when it became more than just a joke about fudge packers.
Well, I think that's what really...
It's not really about fudge packers or fudge packing or packing fudge. It's about that twist of, a chocolatier, calling yourself a chocolatier. Chocolatier is ironic because it makes you sound like a fudge packer. You're trying to disguise your occupation of fudge packing by calling yourself a chocolatier, and then it actually makes you sound like another kind of fudge packer altogether.
But it's interesting here because it's a term.
It works on so many levels.
I know. Like it's a really interesting joke because you did it on Friday and I thought it killed. And you're taking a word that's seemingly offensive, taking the teeth out of that word, and at the same time flipping it on its head.
Yeah.
So that's what's interesting to me about comedy is you'll see something that's seemingly simple. And then when you sit and actually go, oh, what is actually happening here? Like, what is the choice of words and the precision of the words? And that's something I think that you excel at in terms of deciding what words to use versus what not to use. Because it's become so natural that people would say stuff like, oh, Tom's going up and he's being silly or whatever else. But there's way more going on than you being silly.
Yeah, another one I like these days is a new one I do is, it's sort of a worded one like that. It's... You remember when you were at school, you could always tell who were the children of alcoholics based on the ones who carried their marbles to school in the purple velvet Crown Royal bag. And so, I had a discussion with my friend about that joke for a while because I used to say, you know how you can tell who are the children of alcoholics? You ever notice you can tell who are the children of alcoholics? Actually, it's not that. It's when you were a kid. You remember when you were a kid, you could tell who were the children of alcoholics. Remember when you were a kid, you could tell who were the children of alcoholics based on the ones who carried their marbles to school in the purple velvet Crown Royal bag. But for a long time I was saying, based on the ones who would carry their marbles to school in the purple velvet Crown Royal whiskey bag. So I was saying the Crown Royal whiskey bag because I thought enough people wouldn't know what the purple velvet Crown Royal bag was. But everybody knows what the purple velvet Crown Royal bag is. So you don't even need the word whiskey in there. I just assumed that you needed the word whiskey in there. Really interesting. So for probably the first many times I told that joke, I would say the purple velvet Crown Royal whiskey bag, the purple velvet Crown Royal whiskey bag. And then my friend Gabe Abelson, who's one of my great friends and an amazing writer, wrote for David Letterman for many years. As his monologue writer and worked for Jay and all sorts of great people. And he said, no, I don't think you should say the word whiskey. He said you should remove the word whiskey, just the purple velvet Crown Royal bag. Because it's just the alliteration of it, the rhythm of it. The purple velvet Crown Royal bag. The purple velvet Crown Royal whiskey bag is more clunky.
Yeah.
So, and it gets a bigger laugh because it's like people already start laughing when I'm at whiskey.
Yeah.
And so you kind of want to end the joke right when they start laughing so that everybody who's starting to laugh hears everybody else starting to laugh and then laughs harder. It's more of an impactful laugh.
Really interesting.
So, but it's all down to like a microsecond, like a millisecond, So.
But that's what's great about comedy too, is the notion that you have room to evolve, that you can do a joke one way, and then the next day, just by changing the word, will get a bigger laugh or not get a bigger laugh.
Yeah.
Again, to draw the comparison with music, it's not like Zeppelin go up and go, we did Black Dog, it didn't really work out, so let's change the verse to the, that doesn't ever happen. Like, whatever the song is the song is.
Yeah.
But comedy, what I loved about it was that it gives you this room to screw up and to get better at the same time, immediately, right? Like, as soon as you're on stage.
Yeah.
And that's an area that I don't know if discomfort's the right word, but that area seems to be an area you're very comfortable in.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a lot of, the last few years I've been touring like a maniac, so I'm on stage 6 hours a week, every, just doing my set. I do my sets. I do sometimes an hour or so. So it's like, you're kind of like it's just been a lot of trial and error. Like I've, just figuring out. Like first of all, those kind of jokes I was just talking about, like I would never open with those jokes. Those jokes have to come like a little later in the set once people have kind of gotten to know.
That's really interesting
me
too.
Because like I'll start out with like a lot of stuff about myself and some self-deprecating kind of material. I'll talk about sort of things that are, that potentially, may come off as things that maybe I'm being self-reflective or even disappointed in myself. I want to have kids. I think I'm going to wait till I'm 50 to have kids, so I'm dead by the time they're unemployed adults. There's a lot of, I've been opening with a lot of really negative stuff lately, but like personal negative stuff, and real stuff, because I really do, would like to have kids someday, but I also think it would be good to not have to see them become failures. No, but so try one of these delicious meats, by the way.
I can't believe you've not touched the meat tray until now.
No, I'm gonna.
How much of your show was improv? The other night, you said you were trying to incorporate more improv into your shows.
In the stand-up show the other night?
Yeah. What was that? Friday or Saturday?
Yeah.
Saturday.
Whenever I'm talking to the crowd, that's pretty much improv. So whenever I'm talking to an individual in the crowd, that's kind of me just sort of doing some crowd work. So how much? I don't know. I also weave a lot of improv between the jokes. So.
I think it would depend on the set and the show. And...
Like all of the there's jokes that are written and then there's stories that are written, but that's all I would try to weave in improv in between. So it's sort of hard to say.
Do you prefer the improv? Like, do you like the improv?
It just makes it like less monotonous saying the same joke every night.
Yeah.
Even though I don't ever really think this joke feels the same, even if you say it 1,000 times.
That's true.
It doesn't really feel the same ever.
Yeah.
It's about that rhythm with the crowd and everything, and that connection with the crowd too. The timing of it. Right?
Well, I like that you mentioned the connection because it seems to me that that's an important part of your performance, right? Like that's what you're interested in. You're interested in communication. You're interested in connection.
Yeah.
And you're the kind of person on stage that people like. You're a very likable guy. The stuff is very smart. So it's that really. I think that honesty and that genuineness comes out, and that's what people are attracted to.
Yeah. Yeah. I that's the other thing I've started to realize is if you're like in a horrible mood, like you got to pretend that you're not in a horrible mood when you're on stage. And I think sometimes artistically, you like to go, let's keep it real, let's go up and keep it real. And if you're angry about something, a lot of material and stand-up comes from things we're angry about. But you gotta be angry about it, but with a smile on your face, as if you're laughing at the absurdity of the thing that you're angry about. Even though you actually are angry about it, and even though more often than not you're actually tired. You got off a flight at 6 in the morning, and you got on a flight at 6 in the morning, and you had to get up and do radio interviews, and you slept for a couple hours in the afternoon, and if you're hungover on top of that, that really makes it worse, which is why I've stopped drinking when I tour. Like I don't drink before my shows, like that. We had a pretty good amount of whiskey the other night when that was after my last show. I wouldn't have drank like that on the Thursday before the weekend. So you kind of get into timing your benders a little bit around when you have a day off. And even that, I'm even trying to cut back on that now. Because it messes with your mood. So if it's so much easier to pretend you're in a good mood on stage if you're actually in a good mood. And so that's why I've kind of... Actually, I think that like stand-up has been maybe like the healthiest decision I've made in my adult life, to start doing stand-up, full-time like I am. Because I've cut back on a lot of, on basically on drinking. I've cut back on drinking because I felt it affecting me on stage. Even if I hadn't had a drink in a few days, I feel it on stage. So it's kind of like my new thing is I don't drink on the weekends, and I'm doing stand-up every weekend. So it's kind of nice. It's kind of weird. Like you realize like when you stop drinking a lot, you go, wow, like that stuff, like alcohol is like depressing. That's really depressing. Like it makes you feel like shit.
Well, Hemingway was not a happy guy, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it really makes you feel shit. Like when you like 3 days later after you have like, you know, you kind of feel a little bit like, you know, down in the dumps, you know. So it's hard to work through that on stage, and it's much easier to just be feeling good and energetic, and so.
Well, and I think with doing stand up when you're 18, you know, there's that newness, and hey, I can have a drink at work. That's weird, and you know, like it's not. I mean, you know, certainly this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but comedians generally not the healthiest people in the world. Right. So it's easy for a lot of people to fall into that whole. This is what I do, and 25 years later, they're still doing the same thing, right? So I think there needs to be that shift, and what I appreciate about you is you focus on the craft. The craft is what's important to you, and that comes across, right? Like it's not. We're not kids anymore, right? And a lot of it too, man, is I can't. I still feel bad. We hung out on Friday. It's Sunday. Like I still feel like someone hit me in the head with a shoe. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it's kind of like that you just don't bounce back like you used to either. You know, so that's what it was too. Because like, you know, I'm turning 46, but like I felt that shift happen with the booze when I was around maybe 42. You know, because I was, you know, I was touring pretty hard for the last like maybe 8 years, 7 or 8 years or something like that. And so I was, you know, 38 when I started touring full time again, and I wasn't 42 yet. So in those first couple of years, I was, you know, after the show, you know, you drink some whiskey, go out with the other comics, you know, wake up Saturday morning, you got 2 shows that night, you're in your fucking DoubleTree Inn Express suites at the side of a freeway in Jacksonville, Florida, you know.
Well, it's just getting worse and worse as we go along.
You know, you crawl out of bed down to the Steak and Shake and eat a double cheeseburger for breakfast, and go back and get back in bed. You know,
I'm not clear that's not
headache,
good,
you know?
For you, but like all that seemed pretty good.
Yeah, and at 38, that was not too bad. You know, like, you know, you'd be on stage that night, you'd be pretty much back to normal. Yeah. But all of a sudden at 40, 41, 42,
so true.
Man, it just something happened, man, and so it took me about a year to figure out that it was happening. So it was like there was a good year where I was just kind of like Saturday nights were like, you know, it was just my rhythm was a little slower. I was a little bit angrier on stage. If somebody heckled, my response would not be good-natured. It would be very angry and aggressive. You know, and you know, you'd still be able to get through the show and everyone's laughing, but you know, there was an element of like, oh, this guy's angry. Yeah. You know? And I don't like that. Yeah. So I don't like that being the feeling in the room. I want everyone to feel like it's absurd and ridiculous and silly. So
well, everybody certainly had a good time on Friday, that's for sure. So.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, thank you for your time and for hanging out and chatting and all that.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for the delicious sandwich meats.
And we do have a parting gift for you as well.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Because what kind of show would it be without a parting gift?
Oh wow!
I thought you might miss those.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Yeah.
I'm glad you like them. There's a
Joe Louis.
Yeah. What's weird is they're Joe Louis, but there's a picture of an old lady on the box.
Who is she?
She's not Joe, is she?
That's
Joe?
Rosanna Vachon.
So that makes less sense than it did when we...
Maybe Joe Louis was her kid.
Rosanna Vachon, 1932, came up with an idea to cut her cakes using the lid from a container of baking powder. The Joe Louis was born.
So she was the first person to think of cutting a cake. Wow. Yeah. That took a while, it seems like. Weird.
I think she used the lid of the container of baking powder, so when she rolled it, it made that half moon shape.
You know? Yes.
It was sharp like a pizza cutter.
Oh, you're saying she bent it as opposed to.
I think
Oh,
so,
when you
yeah.
pull it off,
Smarter
right?
than me.
Something like that, yeah.